story of your calendar. The first part, the days of the week, the part that doesn't fit because it's not a strict, it's not an orbital thing. So the only part of the timekeeping that's not orbital is the week, and as I mentioned, other cultures have divided weeks into numbers of days that had no astronomical connection. Our culture has a very clear astronomical connection, which becomes transparent when you go into a Romance language, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, because then you see the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Those are the 7 objects that move among the stars, basically. They simply mark themselves out as the brightest objects in the sky and those that move relative to the fixed stars. And of course, what happened in our culture, in the Northern European culture, as opposed to the Romance Southern European culture, is that the classic astronomical namings, which of course were Greek and Roman gods, were overlaid with Teutonic myths. So we had a mashup of 2 different sets of cultures. And so we got 4 Norse gods kicking out, booting out Greek and Roman gods to give us the names of our 7 days. But they had an astronomical origin, that's the key. The ordering is actually argued about, and it's an astrological. So the ordering is based on early Roman astrology traditions, and it's not really even clear how that evolved, but it's based on astrology essentially. So, we have some basis there for the week. If we're talking about the week, the timekeeping, it's a really interesting story. It starts with the founding of Rome in the 7th century BC on the 7 hilltops, Romulus and Remus, and Romulus was the first Roman emperor, and he decided, this was one of the major empires after the pre-Romans had been fractionated warring tribes, which was the case through most of Europe. And Romulus had a significant empire, raised armies, and started to conquer other tribes, and he needed a calendar to do so. Now, to the ancient Romans, the only reason to start counting in the year was when the snow melted enough in the northern parts to send an army out to kick ass and subjugate people. So basically, it was a military calendar where you start your year in March, Mars, the god of war, and then you'd count forward because it's based on raising an army. And so he had a very short year, and there we have the origin, which again, people don't take Latin anymore, but most kids are a little curious about why the last months of the year are named after the numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10 when they're not the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months. And that's because of Romulus. That's the booting up of the calendar in a very hokey way, where it's a 300-day year. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a terrible calendar for agriculture, but they didn't care about agriculture. They would just get the food they needed. A few emperors later, at the time of Priscus, the calendar does become a 12-month calendar. The Romans are also incredibly superstitious. And so at this calendar, the Romans considered even numbers bad luck and odd numbers good luck. And so this calendar has odd-numbered months, but on the premise that shit happens, you got to have a bad luck month, and that's February. So you put all your bad luck in February and make it the even-numbered month. And in ancient Rome, since you couldn't go out and fight or anything, that you just hunker down and eat and go to the vomitorium or whatever. I mean, whatever you did in February, you wouldn't do anything. So it was a bad luck month. You wouldn't even visit people, apparently. So there's the 355-day calendar. And the major calendar form comes with Julius Caesar, by which time Rome has an empire that stretches all the way to my world in Scotland. Oh, we kept them out, yeah. And then all the way to northern Africa and to the Middle East. This is now a vast empire. And regulating civil affairs requires a good calendar. And so for Caesar, it was a matter of not just civic pride, but a matter of tactical and military importance to have a calendar to regulate time across this far-flung empire. And so the Julian calendar was the first major Western calendar form, adding a leap year, regularizing the days so you have a 365 and a quarter average length year, which matches the solar cycle pretty well. It's a decent year, and you'll have noticed already that in building out the year to 12 months, you've had numbered months at the back end, and you've got months named after ancient gods. May is named after Maya, which is a god that appears in almost every world culture. It's like the primal spring god, fertility god. So these are really ancient gods that the months are named after, but Caesar's a pretty heavy-duty dude, and so he decides to take the first numbered month for himself, and so that quintilis becomes July after Julius Caesar. And there things should have left, but Augustus, who came 2 emperors later, was essentially a crazy dude and really powerful and wanted to make his mark on the calendar, but he didn't really have any new ideas to bring to the table. So Augustus, really, basically all he did was he took the next unnamed month for himself, and so Sextilis became August, because, you know, Julius Caesar had a month, I need a month too. And then he went, oh my God, my month is lighter than Caesar's. I can't have a lighter month than Caesar. So he had to grab a day off of February, which is why February is really shortchanged. And then he messed up the sequence, and so he had to dick around with all the numbers, which is why you have to use knuckles to figure out how many days, which are the 30 and the 31 months. So they blame that on Augustus. So blame the whole thing on the Romans, right? It's astrology, it's even number superstition, it's ego tripping, and there's a little bit of astronomy in there too. That's your calendar. Welcome to your calendar. Did anyone ever try and do better? Yes, Napoleon, the brave new world of Napoleon, regulating civil life. Napoleon is too small to read, but basically he took away the pagan references. He took away the naming after gods. He actually decimalized time with 10 hours in a day, 100 minutes in an hour, 100 seconds in a minute, which works out about right. And it didn't work. I mean, he literally tried to enforce in the Napoleonic era decimal time and a rational, non-pagan inflected calendar. And of course, it only lasted as long as his empire lasted, and then he bowed to the Pope and subjugated himself to what essentially at that point was the Catholic calendar again. And it's only really had one adjustment since then by Pope Gregory, who made one little tweak of changing the leap year in years divisible by 400 to even more tightly match to the solar year, a number that I'll be giving in a minute. So that's basically calendars.